I think a few of you have seen me do presentations before based on our data breach report. This is, again, based on the data breach report, but a very different slant on it. And strangely enough, I was talking to my boss during the week, and he said, oh, what we're going to do next year in the data breach report is all these three things, and I think I've actually jumped the gun, so I could be in a lot of trouble on Monday. But anyway, it's not Monday yet. So this is the report that you guys, I imagine a lot of you have probably seen over the years. We've been producing this for about 5 years now, and we had a pretty proud moment a couple of weeks ago. The 2011 report, we had 1 million downloads, and we're feeling pretty good about ourselves, and we were aiming to double up in 2012. We just went through 3 million, so we're feeling pretty damn good about ourselves at the moment. So I don't know what next year's target's going to be. But so look, just you guys know Verizon, who we are? A few nods, yeah, that'll do. Good. Okay, so Verizon, big American company, telecommunications company. We are probably the biggest ISP in the world, so we see a lot of stuff on the internet backbone. That's one of the reasons why we're able to do some of the things that we can do is a lot of the network monitoring. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I've been doing IT for about 20 years. For those of you that are probably looking at him going, yes, he's going to be 50 in March next year, so I've been around a while. Got a mechanical engineering background, as you can probably see by my rather funky little on-the-fly encryption device that I came up with in San Francisco because I didn't have time to encrypt the data. So there's a little SHA dongle here, and I've stripped this out of a drive cage, and I'm using power out of a forensic duplicator to power the drive that's getting encrypted on the fly, so I could just send the drive to the lab without taking the image and then trying mucking around with TrueCrypt containers and screwing the keys up. The lab have got the opposite end of that key, so if I pull that out, the data on the destination drive is just a piece of garbage. So very good for doing forensics and moving along the way. So my mechanical engineering background and my stuffing things together background and my comms programming background, yada, yada, yada. Do some work with SANS. I'm a forensic investigator with Verizon. One of the co-authors of this thing, the data breach report. And one of my other confessions is I'm a mammal, middle-aged man in Lycra, which as a middle-aged man in Lycra, I saw this week and it rather tickled my fancy. Which one of these guys is falling the fastest? That is a spectacular fall from grace, that one. Unbelievable. So that's my one joke for today. I think I've hit my quota already. So the team that I'm a part of, and we have another team member in the room, where I've lost her. Anyway. Oh, there she is. Hey, Shanna. So this is what we do for a living. We do research investigations. Out of the research and investigations, we come up with solutions and knowledge. So, this is what we live and breathe. My boss tells me, you're not an investigator. You're here to get intelligence for our company so we can build better solutions and have better knowledge for doing more investigations. So we keep trying to make the report and the data that I'm going to talk about today and where we get this information from, I'm going to keep on trying to make it more and more and more relevant. We do more investigations every year, but every year we keep adding more law enforcement agencies and reporting services into people that contribute data into, I'll hold it up again, this report. So normally at this stage we start going into a whole lot of stats and figures, and I'm not going to do that today. I'll do some of it, but not a lot of it. What I do want to talk about is the three groups that we see on a daily basis. So we've got organised crime. Actually, I quite like this. This is a bit of a strange one. Over on the right, we've got the organised crime group, and it says, as you know, gentlemen, innovation at the point of sale accounts for our competitive edge. If any of you that's done a data breach investigation, you see a lot of point of sale terminals, and it's always organised crime. So that one really worked for me. I'm sure the guy that wrote it had nothing to do with it. Had nothing to do with understanding what point of sale was about. But hacktivism, we've all heard about it. It happens a bit. There's a bit of it around. We'll talk about that. And cyber espionage, because the Verizon lawyers won't let me say nation state. So let me talk about organised crime. So this is where we see most of our business and most of the data breaches that are investigated. It's organised crime. It's a very, very large number. We'll get to some stats a bit later. But let me just show you a simple thing about how that organised crime works. Metasploit. Anyone in the room use Metasploit? A couple of you? That's my second joke, right? So this is the formula for organised crime. You take Metasploit plus the typical things that we see, RDP, VNC, PC Anywhere, log me in, go to my PC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about remote access, getting remote access to, and this is taken out of the PCI DSS handbook. And I can tell you this is correct, 100% correct. And you add all that up and that's what you get. So this is the organised crime formula for riches. Metasploit plus really dumb remote access plus a whole lot of dumb passwords equals money. And that's pretty much what these guys do on a daily basis. Or as I probably could put it, you can't see it at the back, no doubt. Simple repeatable attacks equals money. These guys are industrial. This is an industry. This is like Henry Ford making motor cars. Back in the day when they're turning out any colour of car you like as long as it's black. And that's what these guys do. They've productionised this. You guys have seen Metasploit. You know what it looks like. So that's just a very simple attack. And that's a single line where I'm just having a fiddle at a local network looking for any VNC password I know in my password list. And just going to do 256 hosts. It'll finish in 2 or 3 minutes. But we see people doing hundreds of thousands of these. We saw 120,000 coming from one IP address in Eastern Europe in a day in May. I think it was the 19th of May we saw this. It was an IP address that we'd look at. So the reason I bring that up is to demonstrate how industrial it is. Wasn't VNC that day, it was PC Anywhere. A whole lot of scans to 5631, just looking for an open port and looking to try the particular modules to try and log in and use common passwords. But we're starting to see changes in the way in which data is, way in which organised crime is working. And they're having to change because there's a whole lot of standards that are requiring encryption. Okay, so we've all got standards we need to apply that require encryption. So that will protect data at rest and data in transit. So we've got stored data taken care of because it's all encrypted, right? Quite often it's not, but in theory, if we're all compliant with the standard, it's cool. We've got data transmission because we've got data in transit being taken care of, so data on the network's fine. But there's nothing in there about processing of data. So let's have a look at that a bit. None of these standards have any encryption on the way the data's processed. Where's data processed? Data's processed in memory. So there's only place you can process data is in memory of a computer. So if I'm trying to transmit something sensitive, and I'm not, by the time I send it out on the wire, it's encrypted. Or I can mask it when it comes in, but it's still in memory before it gets masked. But, system, you'd never see anyone compromise a system that's protected, do you? No? Of course you do. Every time we're starting to see more and more of these things. Around 2008, we saw a lot of RAM scrapers and RAM dumpers. And I think some of the guys in the other room were talking about RAM scrapers, RAM dumpers a bit earlier. So let me just have a, okay. Sorry, let me come out of that mode. And yes, there we go. This is something that we saw in 2009. 2009 is a while ago. It's not a Windows system, it's a point of sale server that we virtualized. We renamed the suspect binaries. You can see PS exec kicked in, it fired off a couple of processes and they died, but these two down here are a couple of dodgy processes. So what this is doing is taking system memory, and it's created a folder called memdump. Of course, it's in system32 because it's hard to find stuff there because there's so many useful things in system32. Every 10 seconds or so, you see this 1680 maps up with 1680 over here, ccs.exe. So every 10 seconds or so, it dumps that process. And I'm going to be doing this live in a few seconds. So this is just a video we recorded at the time for explanation purposes. Okay. So where are we up to? 30 seconds to go. So what we'll start to see shortly is we'll start to see the way that the output file is configured. So this is a very early generation RAM dumper. This is like a generation 0 type of RAM dumper. And of course, right down the bottom here, you can see the last thing that was modified, 22nd of the 5th, 2009, was a Windows CHM file, which is actually a text file with a whole lot of payment card information in it. Well, this is all bogus payment card information, so if you take those first two lines there, you could encode a mag stripe on a credit card and walk into a shop and make a payment with it. Okay, so this is all stuff that was pulled out of memory. So let's let me show you what we're going to do next. See what's on the screen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mock up on my system. I'm going to have a VM of a web server, which is a payment card server, which doesn't store. It transmits, supposedly, and processes, supposedly, payment card data. Doesn't store anything on the hard drive, and it supposedly sends it off to a payment gateway. Matter of fact, all this PHP page does is it just takes the data and puts it into memory variables. Safe enough. It's what everyone does. So, do we have any volunteers in the room? I've got a Stoolie in the room, and I've got to bring up one of my team and embarrass her if we don't have any volunteers. Come up, go on. I know this guy too, so fair warning. I know Jason. What? You got a credit card? Yeah. No. No, just enter some data in here, Jason, just to prove that this is not set up. And would you mind starting it with a 5 or a 4? Follow the numbers, man. Yeah, pick one if you like. Yeah, expiry date. Okay. So that's it. So we've sent our payment off, and now Jason's going to get some T-shirts from Mark's Dodgy Discounts. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, mate.
So let's go over to what we've done in the background is we've already compromised the server. Okay? So we've already compromised our little payment gateway. This is a very common bit of business that we see. So what I'm doing now is I'm going through, oh, well, that was quick. So we've already got Jason's payment card data stripped out of memory. Okay, let me, where'd it go? Well, that was one I did before. I was having to go at Lance Armstrong before. He's having a bad week. So does that look like the numbers you put in, Jason? Yep. So what I've done there is I've got the payment card data out of memory. Let's go back to the presentation, and we'll show you how how that was done, which I'll show you how it's done here. Just to show you how simple this is. That's the entire exploit. The first 3 lines are actually comments, and it ends there. So you can see how compact it is. It's 901 bytes long. 901 bytes that I've managed to pull payment card data out of memory and format it. The reason I'm using payment card data is because it's something I see a lot of, and these exploits are very well known. It's probably the most developed area where we see this stuff. Oop, wrong way around. So what we're doing here, all we're doing is we're grepping out the process ID based on a name. So we're getting all the PIDs out. This is the whole script in pseudocode. I put HTTPD in there because I was trying to get to the Apache process. I'll find the start and stop memory locations. I then use the GNU debugger, which is on this machine already. And just a few things here, like get the strings out, grep it out, sort it, unique it, format it, and then repeat for all HTTP threads. You could see them all scrolling through the screen there before. And then it pulls this out, which is what gets posted through to the payment gateway. Those variables are what gets posted. None of this is written to disk. It's all in the memory of the computer, and it just gets pushed through and through and through. This is very simple. I'm going to say, it's not just about credit cards. It's just the most prolific and easy example to pick. When I say prolific, we see hundreds of these things in a year. And we see probably 20, 25, 30% of all the compromises. So there's other people that are doing other investigations, of course. So it's not just the things that we're looking at. So just let me impress upon you how industrialized this particular group is, organised crime. This is a case study we did in the data breach report. So this is a group that we've been tracking. We've worked on a number of investigations with them across all over the world. Law enforcement's very interested in their activities, and we tracked them on a weekend. We think it was probably a long weekend in their part of the world. So on the Saturday, they compromised 3 sites in North America and 1 in London. And on the Sunday, they compromised, what we got there, 3 more, sort of just sort of north of Florida. Not too good with US geography. And then on Monday, they compromised another 15 locations. So in total, 24 different locations, 9 countries in 3 days. And you can see there's some dots in our part of the world as well. This is a small cross-section of the activities of these guys. These are the same guys where we saw 120,000 scans in a day. They're doing a lot of this on an industrial scale. So let's change it up a bit and start talking about another group. Our dirty glasses. Our friends, the activists. So these guys are extremely different. They're like the exact opposite of what you're talking about with organised crime. Their motivations are very different. They're not about money. They're time-rich and human resource-rich. I mean, human resource-rich, they don't have to employ people. People volunteer to give their time to help the activist cause. There's no profit motivation, which makes them extremely dangerous, because all of a sudden you're going from the target is no longer anything that's cashable. The target is anything. Anything that, if publicly disclosed, will embarrass the company that's been compromised. So the objective now is not to make money. The objective is to name and shame. A bit like Darren Hinch on a much larger scale. So, damage brand and reputation, and impact consumer confidence in the organisation or the government department. So it's a very different motivation. You can see these guys are like This is more like a guerrilla war, whereas the organised crime is more like a traditional war. Here, we don't know what the tactics are going to be, and anything can happen. So last year, these are the types of groups that we were seeing in our caseload. We look at the activist group here. Only 2% of the 761 data breaches last year, we saw an activist group involved. But of the 760 million records we saw compromised, 58% of that was what we saw was what was compromised by an activist group. And it gets worse as you go up. Larger organisations, those with 1,000 or more employees, it's now a fifth of all compromises and 61%. I was talking to one of the banks in Australia and they said, well, what about if it's 10,000 or more employees? And I thought, oh, everyone's got their own question, you know? Well, it's a good question, so we checked it out and there was only 3 compromises where there was 10,000 or more employees last year. 2 out of the 3 compromises in those very large organisations, activist group. So the proportion gets larger as you go up in size. It points very much towards the activist group targeting very large organisations. Makes sense, doesn't it? But there's the stats to prove it, and they're also pulling out large quantities of data. Again, 61% of records or the amount of data that was compromised at a large organisations was compromised by an activist. Nope, already done that one. Yep. Of course, the frequency increased. It was only 2%, but it was much smaller before. We're seeing more blending between different types of threats as well. A lot of, often see DDoS from these guys as well. We won't talk about DDoS too much, although we will get into it a little bit. We're seeing blends of hacktivism or activism and organised crime. We'll run you through a bit of a case study with what they were doing. Anyone been following the news in America? With the, there's not just elections going on over there, but there's been massive DDoSes against the big US banks. This one's headquartered in New York, that we'll talk about. So this bank was copying an absolute thumping. They were seeing, from a DDoS perspective, they were seeing 40 gigabits a second of DDoS heading their way. That'd probably flood Australia, you know? I don't know what our bandwidth is coming into this country, but I reckon that would probably hammer Australia. And by the time they engaged us, they couldn't even see half the attacks that was just coming so thick and fast. But we were able to pull a lot of the data of what was crossing our network, and we could see a lot of attacks appearing to come from China, from India, Indonesia, over in California, India as well, and I think there was some in Thailand. It looks like a few in South Korea. These guys had actually told the organisation that you're going down 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, we're going after you. And they lived up to expectations. They hit it, 5:01. They drove the bank out. You know, their websites drove them out of existence. So it was pretty good. We were able to work with the bank and law enforcement in the States, and that enabled us to look at our network data, and we're able to identify a site in Buffalo and one in Mexico that was actually controlling all of these bots, and we're able to work with their ISPs to not just cut off the traffic coming out of those the homes where these guys were operating from, but also hand that data over to law enforcement. So, successful case study. It's all good, the bad guys, got the special bracelets on, the bank's back in business. Unfortunately, the whole thing was actually a ruse. They were working, the DDoS was just a way and means of hiding the activities of what was really going on. It was, the old tactic of make everyone look over there while you're walking in the side door. These guys had also compromised previously some VPN accounts and had broken into the bank and stole a whole lot of data and then paste binned it. just to publicly name and shame them. So it's like, ha ha ha. Not only did we DOS you, but we also stole your data at the same time we were DOSing you. Not a really pretty situation for the bank, and one which I'm sure they don't want to repeat. This is not actually the data that was compromised. Sorry, excuse me. This was something that we published some time ago as part of a competition that we run every year with the Data Breach Investigations Report. So let's talk about our third group. Anyone recognise this? Oh, you're a movie buff in the room. Not necessarily? Looks Russian to you? It's actually it's a fictitious country. Anyone know my fictitious country? Pardon? Sylvania? No. Tintin? No, it's not from Tintin. I'm going to show my age as the oldest guy in the room again, aren't I? Yes, Grand Duchy of Fenwick. Very funny Peter Sellers movie, the Mouse That Roared. They actually attacked America, they attacked New York, and it was back in the days of the Cold War. Everyone in New York was in bomb shelters, and they turned up. Their whole plan, the whole economic plan for their country was to attack New York, lose the war, so the states would give them funding and aid so to bail out their economy. So the Grand Duchy of Fenwick being the cyber espionage, this is my symbol for cyber espionage. It's a hilarious movie. Recommend you watch it. So this is less than 1% of our caseload, but it's all about IP theft, stealing of any personal data, any intellectual property. They make great big news stories every time they happen, but there's actually very few attacks. So it's one of those things. I think someone was talking about a talk that somebody else did about how you see some things are overrepresented in the media proportionally to how much it happens. This, in my opinion, is one of them. But let's talk about some of the ways in which we see, particularly this IP theft angle, work into cyber espionage. Surprisingly, you look at these figures, this is the way in which the threat actions happen. Malware, hacking, social engineering, and misuse. This is actually spun on its head from the typical data breach situation. Malware is usually a lot more heavily deployed, there's a lot more hacking, and very little misuse and social engineering. We see with cyber espionage, there's a lot of social engineering involved, very targeted malware, very sophisticated. And some of the ones that we see with the social engineering of these incredibly sophisticated pieces of phishing that we see going on, we're getting click-through rates, successful click-through rates of 20 to 30% in some of the investigations we do. 20 to 30% sounds very little, but you think about the amount of spam that goes out. This is so good that 1 in 5 people are clicking on it. It's very good. And what that ends up typically doing is working out some way to get inside the environment, whether that just be a direct link to provide a back channel, something like what the beef guys were talking about earlier today, or some way of dropping malware to provide that back channel to get inside the organisation. So the misuse that we also see is about insiders being also involved. So colluding with these guys. Someone inside the organisation often colludes for cash inside the organisation. That happens in more than half of the cases where we're involved. So this looks really busy, okay? I get it. A lot of colours here and a lot of big dots, and a bit like a child's TV program, I know. What we're looking at here is point of entry to compromise. So how long does it take someone to get into the environment and then compromise data? How long does it take them to get discovered once they're in? And then how long does it take to kick them out once they've actually been in there and discovered? 65% of the time, it doesn't take very long for these actors to get in. But when they're in, 41% of the time they're in for years. Once these actors get in, they're in there for a long time. The reason they're in there for so long is there's no indication in the environment to say, well, there's something wrong going on here. So they stay in there undetected for years and years and years. So if you're stealing intellectual property, what is the indicator of compromise? How do you know that? Yeah. No one reads logs, do they? Anyone in the room read logs? I read logs for a living, but you know. So, didn't see your hand, Shannon. So this is one of the big problems, is that no one's really reading and determining what's going on. It's always someone from outside of the organisation that says what's going on. And most of the time when these attacks are detected, of course they're detected afterwards, and it takes a long time for the bad guys to be kicked out because they've been in there for so long, they've got back doors in all over the place. It's a bit like you're paying the light and the power for these guys to use the computers. They've got a very good control of the data center and the environment in which they're working in because they've been in there for so long, they've got so many back doors. So let me show you how they get discovered. 3/4 of the time, law enforcement tells the victim organisation that they've been discovered. The next one is what we call happenstance, or some unrelated party goes, oh, dude, I think you've got a problem. Signature-based antivirus, a whole 7%. Awesome, good work, guys. Anyone think signature-based antivirus is the only solution? Please read this statistic. Take it to heart. 7% of the time, it'll help you. Don't get me wrong, it's a very good thing. Have I got AV on my laptop and phone? Hell yeah. Do I think it's going to fix everything? Hell no. So you can see down here, I think somewhere down here we've got anomaly-based network IDS, 0. Discovered during investigation of another incident, 0. Financial audit and reconciliation process, 0. Third-party security audit scan, 0. Getting the point? Okay. Yeah. The discovery is really bad because it's really hard to detect. The guys are in there for a long time stealing a lot of data. And most of the time when there's a data breach, when we're looking at that payment card data breach, the way in which most of it gets picked up is third-party fraud detection. We've got no fraud on, these guys are smart. They don't steal anything they can use for fraud. What would they want to do fraud for? It's not their objective. They stick very much around IP and data theft. You see a very different situation between cyber espionage and across all incidents as to where the data gets stolen from. 57% of the time, in all incidents, data is stolen from a server as opposed to 98% with cyber espionage. Almost every time you see data stolen by a nation-state actor, it's stolen from a server. You can see there's some offline data and people as well. This is mainly about getting access to this data. So it's about stealing credentials to get access to the payload which they're really wanting to steal. You can see down here, 56% of the time in all incidents, it's involved, some type of end-user device is involved. A lot of that, of course, is point of sale. We classify point of sale as an end-user device because an end user can touch a point of sale typically. So please, when you think about nation state, it's about data on servers. Some of the detailed indicators that we see with nation state actors, cyber espionage. No Verizon lawyers in the room, are there? Misuse of tools, PS tools. Anyone got some of these PS tools on their servers and systems? Yeah, they're very useful. But we see a lot of. This is one that we find quite curious, is you see a lot of the time you see RAR being used as the compression tool of choice. I asked the question as to why people think, I'll ask the question again. Why do people think RAR's used rather than WinZip? Please.
You can append it to an arbitrary binary file, and it can still be treated as the original binary, but also RAR.
Hadn't heard that one before. Thank you. Did everyone hear that? So I'm saying down here, often you can append the archive to an arbitrary binary file, and it still looks like the original binary file, a bit like an alternate data stream. Haven't tried that. We'll give it a try later. Any other ideas as to why RA is often used? Yeah, better crypto than zip, yep. Command line, well, you can zip a command line too, but yes, it is command line. Yep, yep. Use command line, sure. Look, the other things is, of course, you can split the archive quite easily with RA. It does that very easily, whereas zip's a bit more messy. And if you put a password on it, you can't actually see the files inside the RA archive, as you can with the zip archive. You can still see what's in there, but you can't extract it if it's password encoded. You see a lot of mappy get as well. The other indicators that we see is these guys will use a local IP address. So if they're going after an Australian organisation, they'll compromise a host in Australia that would be expected to be one of the hosts that would be typically expected to be interacting with the victim organisation. Also see, they wouldn't be coming out of a bulletproof host in Romania, which is a very obvious indicator of compromise. If you're an Australian organisation that has no business with bulletproof hosting in Romania. Once they get in, you see lateral movement as well. So when we talk about lateral movement, they break into one system and then start working outwards, looking for the data. Data is often aggregated on mail and directory servers. Mail and directory servers are great. The mail server or the directory server is usually one of the most powerful ones you have in the organisation. It's got a lot of traffic, it's got good connectivity, and it's got huge amounts of disk space. If you see a mail server doing a lot of network activity, there's a lot of email going on today, yeah, fair enough. A lot of email happens every day. So it's something very common. You see these things compromised. A directory server is also a great way of knowing who's who in the organisation. If you can get access to AD or LDAP, you can often get hierarchical structures of the physical organisation, of the people in the organisation. So they're very common targets. So let's start to bring this to a close and wrap a few of these things up. So organised crime makes up about 87% of the caseload that we see. It's a massive amount of the compromises that we're involved with. Typical parts of the world, typical organisations that they target: hospitality, retail, financial, because it's all about money. These guys are very much motivated about stealing credit card, debit card. ACH is clearing, check clearing. PIN data is fantastic, so you don't have to steal payment cards and then receive goods and then sell the goods to make some cash. You just type the PIN in at the ATM and you get cash out of the ATM. Much better, much better, much lower risk, particularly if you wear a baseball cap. Some of them aren't that smart, thankfully. They also like to steal email for getting other information. Indicators of compromise is these guys will go after the low-hanging fruit. It's very much about stealing anything that has the least resistance and weighs in of the least resistance. Fraud patterns are how they're often picked up. Very low, very complex, very low complexity of their attacks, and it's always about financial gain and sometimes about identity theft. This is quite difficult to categorise. It's only 2 to 4% of the caseload that we see, but yet, how do you classify an activist attack? What are they looking for? Star is what is the organisations are looking for. Maybe the only thing we can say is that it tends to be at the top end of town, but that doesn't mean that some small organisation can't come on the radar of an activist. The attacks tend to be more highly complex because they've got more motivation to attack a specific organisation. So the attack complexity goes up because they actually have very much a focus on that particular organisation. One thing we do see with these attacks, though, is they tend to often compromise the organisation, then make the declaration of attack, and then do the paste afterwards. So they often break in first, so they actually have compromised the organisation. Then they say they're going to break in, and then they post the data. So it's much, they're very good at marketing their skills as well by saying, yeah, we always get in because they've got in first, then they make the declaration. So It's a smart way to play business. Cyber espionage, of course, government, critical infrastructure, high technology, military targets. Often steal email, obviously intellectual property, anything classified and sensitive. Repeated access is something that we see. These guys are coming in over and over and over and over periods of months and years. And as I said before, they're smart in the way they do it. They're looking to steal a lot of consumer, they don't steal consumer records because that type of thing leads to fraud, which is an indicator of compromise, if that organisation does have consumer records. It's about lateral movement and espionage. That's pretty much what we've got for you today. So just before we, Q&A, there's I'd like to bring you to this. We have a security blog that we post, verizon.com/enterprise/security blog. We're making some announcements this Wednesday at 3 o'clock. So we're posting some new data up there this coming Thursday. So we're going to pretty much the same type of data, but we're going to start looking at things in different ways. And today I've sliced it this way. We're going to go horizontal on Wednesday. So open the floor up to any questions. Sorry?
We've been finding more and more metadata containing things like card numbers. For example,
Yeah.
there seem to be thousands of people who have an email address of the credit card number at gmail.com.
Wow.
Most of them tend to be in Asia. The name on the credit card field is almost always a credit card number from transactions from certain countries. We're getting more and more
Bizarre.
pressure to preserve more and more of this information.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want this stuff stored at all.
Yeah.
We throw away card numbers, but we have to store all this other crap.
Yep.
Do you see where this is going, where these trends in preserving data is actually counterproductive?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Did people, wasn't really a question, it was a statement, and then it was like, what do you see? Did everyone hear the statement? Yep, cool. So look, that's a tough one, I've got to say, because that's a strange situation. So if you have any PCI requirements, you're probably breaking them by storing it, unless you store it appropriately. So then you've got to add, then you're adding cost to your own business to store that data appropriately. So yeah, it's a tough situation, and it is one of the unintended consequences of some of these standards, I think. You may be able to argue you're not storing, processing, and transmitting the data, so those regulations don't apply to you, maybe. I am a QSA, but I don't really practice that all that much. More of the investigations type. So I'd have to ask a QSA, and they always start their answers off with, well, it depends. Yes, sir.
I was surprised to see loud data exfiltration under the espionage column instead of the hacktivist column. So I'm wondering if I'm misunderstanding what you mean by the word loud.
No. No, it's typically you see that the exfiltration, they bring a big clump of files together and then pull them out together. Most organisations are looking at what's coming in, and when it comes to looking at what's going out, they cover their eyes. They don't want to know what's leaving the organisation. So a lot of it's loud. Was one that we did earlier this year, an investigation, and the exfiltration was out over DNS. And you should have seen, the DNS traffic was, if I had a whiteboard, I'd show you a graph that goes like that, like that, like that, and then goes up here, and then comes back down. The exfil was the DNS traffic that went through the roof. I don't know how many times it was, but it was 10 to the 6 or some ridiculously big change in the amount of DNS traffic. More questions? I saw some other hands.
Yeah.
Oh, another one. Sorry.
So, could you go back a slide?
Yes, sir.
I was slightly confused by the numbers at the top.
Yep.
What accounts for the remaining percentage?
That's the ones where we have trouble working out which group they go into. So we didn't really, rather than just say, oh, it's probably organised crime, we just left it out. So there is an others column, but what's that? Let's say that's 1, 5, 92, there's 8% left over. It's not bad. better than making stuff up, I say.
Anyone else?
One down here.
Just looking also at that slide there where you've got the motivation being financial gain and identity fraud. I was just wondering whether the data that you have actually allow you to look into the extent that the records that are breached actually being used maliciously further down the track, or if they're just being stored, or...
Yeah, typically, particularly with organised crime, the way in which it's discovered is always fraud. So, there's very little, I'm not sure what percent, it's like, that percent of the time where there's an organised crime attack against any cacheable type of data. The only way it's discovered is through fraud. Or the other popular discovery method is law enforcement bust them for fraud they've done, on this company, on this business, but there's also these other 8 businesses or 28 or 38 or 108 businesses they've compromised. Law enforcement nabs them for that one and then finds out about this, this other cache, and then they notify them. That's 60% of the time law enforcement actually says, by the way, guys, you've been popped. It's not a good day for the poor victims to get a phone call from the other side of the world. And hey, it's John from the AFP here. How you doing? How you doing over there in Texas today?
Anyone else?
There's a couple up here.
In protecting your organisation from security threats, obviously, based on this, you're potentially going to model what sort of threats are most applicable to you.
Yeah.
That's obviously going to be quite easily worked around by the attackers if these groups start to work together. So the motivation might be one, but the techniques might be expected of the other. Is that something we're seeing happening already, or is it something you would anticipate?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing it with these guys. Not only do we see them steal data and then post it and go, ha ha ha, your security sucks, you're a bad company, but then they actually keep some of it for themselves, and then use that data. So yeah, it already has happened, and they do steal stuff and then use it for not pure and altruistic motives as they publicly attest to. So yeah, is the short answer. I think there's one more behind. Gentleman in yellow.
You mentioned the phenomenon of organised crime and hacktivism kind of becoming a single entity.
Yep.
Is that the anonymous DDoSes you while the organised crime sneaks in the side door?
Yeah, we believe they were the same actors, doing the, it was all a total setup. That everyone make everyone look out the window because something's gone bang out there while somebody steals the beer from the bar. It was that type of attack. Because we think it was a setup. Of course, law enforcement doesn't tell us everything. We have to try and put some of this stuff together ourselves. But yeah, that was very much that same type of attack. Where you say, not only do these guys sometimes steal data and then do the pastebin ha ha ha, as well as then use it for fraudulent purposes later. So does that answer your question?
Kind of, yeah. Do you think it was maybe more of organised crime taking advantage of the hacktivists? And I'm trying to marry up the organised crime aspect with the script kiddie anonymous attacks.
Yeah. Look, probably not. The organised crime stuff is very scripted and repeatable. So look, they work out how to do one attack, and they keep doing it. Like the attacks that these guys use are, it's not O Day, it's like 2010, or 2009, or before, it's like stuff you don't even have a CVE entry for because do you have a CVE entry for not having a password on your RDP that's publicly available? There's not, CVE 0 maybe. So that's the type of thing that they look for, and they keep looking for it because it's low-hanging fruit. So some of the questions that we often get is, it might help demonstrate the point at which I'm trying to make is that people say, hey Mark, do you see attacks against the hypervisor of a VM? Oh, hi Mark, do you see attacks against that against cloud-based computers. And so, yes, we do. But where we see data actually being stolen, it's getting stolen, from a virtual machine, not because it's a virtual machine, because it's got poor security. It gets stolen from a cloud computer or a cloud service, not because it's in the cloud, it's because it's got really poor security. So it always gets back to, can I just walk down the street and pull the apple off the tree and take it? Yeah, that's most crime is just taking the apple from the tree because you're walking down that street at the time. One more?
Have you found that disclosure rates from organisations that have been breached has got better over the years?
Disclosure rates. Well, I'm not sure about disclosure rates. One thing I can say about disclosure is that, put this the right way. Disclosure is something that's a double-edged sword. It's great that people know about things, but the other side of the sword is that the information that gets released is often not what the investigator writes. Because of course the investigator writes a confidential report which goes to you as the client. I can't talk about it to anybody else, not unless you authorise me to do that. It's strictly confidential information between you and me. So then you talk to your legal department, and your legal department interprets it, and then the legal department and you talk to your marketing department and they interpret it, and then they talk to the PR people and they interpret it, and then they make a release. And sometimes the only thing I can recognise is the company name. So yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but I don't really know if it's a good or a bad thing. But as a human, I'd like as a person rather than a company employee, I'd much rather know about something that's happened than not know. So, do we have time for
One last question from the fellow behind the pillar there. You can't see him, Mark, but he's there.
Stealth guy.
Yeah. Stealth.
Yeah, sorry you can't see me. Obviously, banks wouldn't release any specifics about how much money they've lost, but have you guys done any risk modelling as to how much money each of those categories has done? Obviously, organised crime is going to be going, like you said, for credit card numbers and small accounts here or there, but overall, damage-wise, if you could put a rough money value on them, could you talk about any of those?
Yeah, that actually, not that specific question, but the money one always comes up. I keep threatening to write a frequently asked questions as to end this presentation. The question of money always comes up. I'll bring in I'm a forensic investigator and not an accountant clause at the moment. But what I mean by that is, as an investigator and someone that likes to try and speak the truth as much as I can, I don't want to try and work out what something costs, and often by the time we've done with our investigation, we don't know what it's cost. We're probably the first or second person that knows about this. And then there could be legal fees coming afterwards. There could be regulatory fines, which happen years later. There can be jail terms, which happen even years and years and years later. So it's really hard to quantify that. And I've got to respect the guys that try and quantify it, but our organisation's trying to take a stand about not quantifying it because it's really, really hard, and we think anything that we do is going to be flawed. So sorry, no. It's the other way to answer that. Well, thank you very much, guys. I think that's all the time we have.
Thank you, Mark.